the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, November 10, 2016. All managers are present except Manager Shackleton and Manager Becker. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board in a matter that is not on the agenda or that is on the consent agenda? No hands. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Under information items of correspondence, we have 2 items of correspondence here. One is an invitation to attend the Minnetrista State of the City address on the evening of November 29th, 7 p.m. The other is an announcement also from the City of Minnetrista that they have approved, they've completed their wellhead protection planning process, and they've received notice from the Minnesota Department of Health that their plan was approved. And they thank us for our assistance in the development of the wellhead protection plan. Under consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of the October 27th board meeting. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any opposed? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Madam Chair, under information, there's the MOAB delegation selection. Is there an action item?
There is no action item. We're going to take action on the 17th. It's here for informational purposes. Thank you for pointing that out. President's report. I attended a meeting this afternoon out in Victoria. It was the advisory committees for the 6 Mile Halsted Bay planning effort. Staff there were Administrator Erdahl, Mr. Whisker, Ms. Brown, and the consultants were there as well. Good representation of cities and Soil and Water Conservation District, Three Rivers Park District sent 2 folks, and good discussion about the diagnostics and where the problems are, and some of the beginning to divide it into opportunity zones and giving examples of the work that's going on right now in Victoria. So that group will be convening again relatively soon. Manager Miller, report from Planning and Policy Committee.
The minutes of the last meeting are in the pack, and they were complete, and I want to thank Matt for such a superb job of recording everything that was said, and in some cases not said, but implied. Manager Blix is the only one that wasn't there, so I hope they're helpful reading them, and they're completely okay. Terrific.
And Manager Becker, who's out of town. There was no board member at the CAC last night, but is Ms. Mamayev here? Yes. Could you give us a brief report of the CAC meeting?
Yes. President White, managers, the CAC met last night and they had a full plate of projects that were before them. They had 6 non-homeowner cost share grants that made it through the fall application process, and they reviewed those and provided recommendations that the board will see at the December workshop. They also, and those grants were, there were 6 grants totaling $261,824, and the recommended funding is in the range of $170,000 that will be coming up for consideration at the board level. We had $250,000 available for the fall round, so you will see those details at the upcoming workshop next month. The CAC did approve 2 shoreline cost share projects that wanted to be installed this fall yet. So we prepared them for review, and both of those were approved. One was on Christmas Lake in Chanhassen, and that actually is going to be a very interesting project that will involve 3 different BMPs, rain garden, shoreline buffer, as well as coir logs to help stabilize the shoreline as well. And this applicant plans to create a video that will be provided to the district for the district's use. They're a professional video producer, and then also will be promoting the shoreline project to the Christmas Lake Homeowners Association in early 2017. And that project was funded at the $5,000 amount, which is the limit for shoreline to be approved at the CAC level. The whole project total is about $13,158, so staff recommended funding at 50% not to exceed $5,000, and the CAC approved that. And that is believed to be the first co-funded shoreline project on Christmas Lake. So there's a lot of interest on the behalf of the applicant to be an example, a demonstration for others on Christmas Lake, and we'll be promoting that to the Homeowners Association. And the other homeowner project that was also approved last night is on Grays Bay on Lake Minnetonka. Karen Williams on Bantus Point Lane is going to be installing native plants and pollinators on her green space between her home and the shoreline, also as a demonstration and to capture runoff from her home. And that grant was approved at the $161,645.11. So the cost share budget for 2016 for the homeowners was $100,000. Previously approved $27,089, and then the additional approvals last night of $6,645.11. So a total of 8 cost share projects were approved. 6 will be coming to the board in December. And then also the CAC approved the recommended funding levels for 15 Cynthia Krieg projects. There were 16 that made it through the application process and completed final applications, and only 1 was not recommended for funding, and that slate of projects will also be coming to the board in December. And the funding amount was about $98,000 for the 15, and the budget is $100,000, so it came in within the budgeted amount. And that was their business last night. They were a busy bunch.
Thank you. Well, thanks to staff and to the CAC for the work that they put in on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed in the agenda. I refer it to. We have no public hearings this evening. We do have a permit before us at item 10.1, permit 16-502, Ms. Workin. And a brief word before, no, come forward, that's fine, about process. Ms. Workin will present, and then any member of the public who wishes to address this can have a couple of minutes to talk about their concerns about this project.
President White, managers, tonight I am presenting on permit 16502. This is an application from the Lander Group for a mixed-use development, the 38th Street development, occurring on 2707 38th Street East, 3800, 3806, and 3812 28th Avenue South in Minneapolis. This permit does not require any variances or exceptions to watershed NCWD rules. It is appearing before the board at request of a member of the public following the public comment period. We did meet with a member of the public following the request to discuss their concerns. Their concerns are centered around a 0 lot line on the western edge of the proposed development and the effects of this 0 lot line may have on the accumulation of snow and rainfall on their property due to differences in the building heights. Tonight I will present on what the project entails, how it was evaluated under Watershed District rule, and provide a recommendation. This project includes a 0.55 acre area. It is currently 4 single-family homes with an alley in between. It is located to the north of Lake Hiawatha, right on our legal boundary. So the 38th Street is the separation of our legal boundary with the Mississippi Water Management Organization. Our hydrologic boundary actually bisects the property in question, so part of the property flows into storm sewer systems in the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, and part of the property flows into storm sewer systems that are part of the MWMO. However, it is wholly within our legal boundary. Under the existing conditions, 0.31 of the 0.55 acres flow into the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. The proposed project involves a 0.08 increase in impervious surface area on the parcels. in order to construct a mixed-use development. Under the proposed plan, there will be a 0.2 acre decrease in area flowing into Minnehaha Creek. It'll be through grading instead routed into the MWMO area. Of those 0.2 acres, 0.14 are impervious that are being decreased, and 0.06 of the decrease is pervious. Since the proposed project involves greater than 5,000 square feet of disturbance and has an increase in impervious surface area, our erosion control and stormwater management rules are triggered. We have jurisdiction for these rules in Minneapolis within our boundaries. To meet erosion control requirements, they are employing standard erosion control BMPs, including a rock construction entrance, the use of silt fence, permanent vegetative stabilization, all of the standards. To meet our stormwater management rules for a site less than an acre, they are required to incorporate BMPs in conformance with the MPCA Stormwater Manual. Sites that are less than an acre are not required are not subject to analysis for volume and rate control under our rules. Under the existing conditions, with the 4 single-family homes, there is no stormwater management. Stormwater just leaves in sheet flow off of the site into the storm sewer system. Under the proposed condition, the majority of the site is covered by a flat roof. The roof outline is outlined in orange. Stormwater that falls on the roof will be routed internally and drained into a sump catch basin before being piped into the storm sewer system. Areas of the project that are not covered by the roof will continue to leave as sheet flow as in the existing conditions. BMPs that are being implemented as part of this project in order to meet our stormwater requirement that are part of the MPCA Stormwater Manual include erosion control BMPs during construction, the use of the sump catch basin as a structural BMP, and incorporation of green space along 38th Street and 28th Avenue as part of non-structural BMPs. In summary, this permit triggers the district's erosion control and stormwater management rule. It fulfills the requirements of the erosion control and stormwater management rule for a site that is less than 1 acre, and therefore staff recommends approval of the project with the conditions listed in the permit report. Thank you.
Thank you. May I see by hands anyone who wishes to speak about this project to the board? This permit. Sir, would you come forward? And please begin with your name and your address.
All right. My name is Stephen Ostendorf. My address is 2701 East 38th Street. The property directly adjoining the project that we're now discussing. I have just a prepared statement. It gives 2 sentences of just a brief background. I've been advised to enter some detail into the record. I assure the committee that it would take no more than 2 minutes, and if I can quickly read through it, I would
You're
very
not
much appreciate
restricted,
it.
it was just before the...
I'm sorry, what?
You're not restricted to 2 minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to voice our concerns regarding 16-502 Lander Group development and the flooding risks my wife and I believe that their current building plans pose to our home at 2701 East 38th Street. My wife and I were very disappointed to learn that despite a Planning Commission staff recommendation to deny a variance, the City Planning Commission approved the Lander Group's application for 0 setback construction along our adjoining property line between 2701 and 2707. We have several concerns regarding the impact the construction process and the presence of a 4-story building located on the lot line just 4 feet away from our east wall will have upon our 2-story building. We've been advised to voice one of these concerns in this forum and to make that concern a part of the public record for your consideration. The staff members at the offices of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District have been very helpful in explaining to us the regulatory process and the applicable criteria for the approval of a permit. We were told that for projects planned for less than an acre, the criteria of best practices for stormwater management apply. We were also told that the collection and discharge of water falling upon the roof of the building have been accounted for in the design of the new construction. What we learned have not been accounted for are the wind-driven rain and snow that will strike the west wall of the new building and fall directly upon our property in the 4-foot space between the two buildings. Since the new Lander Group building is planned to be substantially taller than our existing structure, we are concerned that a substantial amount of precipitation would be captured and channeled directly down their west wall and onto our property. We're also concerned that the greater height of the Lander Group building, along with the 4-foot separation between the two buildings, will serve to channel winds and increase the occurrence of snow drifting along the entire east wall of our existing building. We were told by your staff that our location, the infiltration rate for stormwater into the soil is relatively poor, and that the soil drawdown rate is relatively slow. We were also told that this data led to a revision of the plan submitted by the Lander Group. The plans for a holding and drainage area for stormwater were abandoned in favor of a direct discharge into the city's storm sewer system. This insight regarding the soil condition further heightened our concern that additional stormwater and melting snow channeled down the west wall of the taller Lander Group building and trapped directly onto our property in the 4-foot space between our two buildings will follow the path of least resistance and end up in our basement. My wife and I have asked the Lander Group to reconsider their construction plans in a letter dated October 20th, 2016. We have asked for them to incorporate a usual and customary setback to address this concern and to minimize the potential damage to our home. We understand that this would ultimately reduce the square footage of the floors of the proposed building, but it would create a larger green space between our buildings that would enable both properties to share in the safe management of precipitation captured and channeled by the top half of the west wall of the proposed building. Subsequent correspondence with Mr. Andy Root, a representative from the Lander Group, has informed us that he has read that letter and that the construction plans have not changed. We have supported and continue to support the proposed project. My wife and I only ask this board to delay the approval of the permit until the concerns and requests that we have made regarding the proposed building plans are addressed. We believe that anyone in our situation would be more interested in heading off a foreseeable water problem in a finished basement than to deal with a costly problem after it might occur. Thanks for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Manager Olson?
Could you go back and, actually both of you, can you pull up your map and can you please show us
Yes.
his property?
In the map you see before you, Mr. Ostendorf's property is, is here.
The
Building
white-
on the west side.
Yep, I see it. Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that was accurate.
Manager Shackleton?
Actually, can we follow up on that real quick?
Yes.
So you indicated in the presentation that there was a net reduction in the water that was going in. You indicated this compilation of parcels straddles the boundary with the Mississippi
Right.
Drilling Well, and that there's a net loss in flow towards Minnehaha Creek.
Right, so under the proposed grading plan, more water would be directed to MWMO's, the area that receives storm sewer, the storm sewer system on 38th Street,
Yep.
which funnels into MWMO's hydrologic zone,
Yep.
and less would be funneled into MCWD's.
Is in the map that's in our packet, there's the very specific map in our packet has directional flows of pipe, like where the pipes are flowing and how the parking lots are graded, and I'm just having trouble interpreting everything. Could you give an indication of where the flows will be directed on the map?
So under the proposed conditions, this section right here will be draining to 38th Street East. The area that will be draining to Minnehaha Creek is this section right here that is not covered by the roof, if that's correct. One of the engineers from the project are here as well. So this section right here is what is draining to Minnehaha Creek. The sections that are covered by the roof are going to be draining this way down WMO.
Thank you.
Manager Olson?
And that roof is going right over the alley?
That is my understanding.
I'm seeing nods back here.
Could we get a description, like, I mean, I feel like this is kind of piecemeal in the sense of, I know our scope is this, but what is, if there are elements that are outside of this that are flowing into the creek or towards the creek, can we get a sense for what the whole thing looks like? Does my question make sense?
No.
I don't know what you're asking.
If you just indicated that this is the area that flows into the creek shed,
Right.
what is this and how is this linked to this?
So it's this area of the parking lot that is not covered by the roof, and therefore it's leaving as sheet flow down to 28th Avenue South.
Do you mean the 7 parking stalls?
So the difference is.
Mr. Meehan.
Shackleton is, this area flows to the MWMO. By putting the roof over, they're grabbing this roof water and it's getting routed out of the storm sewer.
Yep.
Previously, this stuff along here,
Went north.
which would sheet flow to the south, went to Indiana Creek, that's the chunk that's coming out of the MWMO through this roof line.
And that's how we account for the 0.2 acre decrease in surface area that is flowing to the creek, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, and is now flowing to MWMO's
Okay.
area.
Is there a permit from MWMO?
We did reach out to MWMO. They don't have a regulatory program that covers situations like this, but they were made aware of the situation and did not have any concerns.
Thank you. Other questions? Manager Shackleton?
The concerns that you raised were about rain being channeled in by a 4-foot gap between 2 structures.
That rain driven by wind against the west wall of their building would drain down directly onto our property. And we were told the current models don't account for that. It only accounts for the rain which strikes the roof, but did not account for the water which strikes actually the wall. And my point was when was the last time we had rainfall that was straight down? There can be quite a large volume of water driven into the wall, which would create some drainage onto our property.
And I understand your concern because I had water flowing into my basement off of water that was hitting the side of my house, and I understand the concern. My understanding after being on this board for 9 or 10 years is that we only have authority to regulate water that is conveyed by mechanical means, gutter, drains, or by natural means, the slope of the earth, or other kind of designs of that nature. Am I incorrect about that?
Manager Shackleton, board members, first of all, the board's, the district's review is framed by the terms of its adopted stormwater rule. And as Ms. Workin explained, for this type of development, the particular requirement is to incorporate feasible, reasonable best management practices to limit hard surface, to enhance infiltration, and to manage peak flow control off the site. What that refers to is water that has fallen on the site and then how that water is managed. So in this case, if that 4-foot area were on the project, part of the project parcel, then the question for the district would be, is there some reasonable management practice that Lander Group could use to keep that water from flowing onto your property? But it appears to me that it's a city building and zoning issue, and once the siting of the building is approved by the city, the district basically then looks at that and works with that and bases its judgment about whether there's a way to manage that water on the site. So it's unclear to me. With reference to Zero's lot line, it sounds like the 4 feet is on your property.
Yes.
And so I'm not, you know, I'll refer it back to our staff and engineer, but I'm not sure that means the district is in a position to capture precipitation that's falling on the land or property before it moves onto your property.
And that's, to that point precisely, our interpretation or the way that we were looking at it was that if wind-driven snow or rain were to strike the side of the building, there's 2 floors, you have above ours, which would capture it. It would flow down and then flow directly onto ours, so it was the discharge of water from their building onto our property that we felt, you know, at least we would bring the matter up for you to consider based on how we were looking at the potential problem.
Mr. Mann?
Manager White, manager. So, one thing we looked at when we looked at how water flows on this site is currently there's houses on each side that have green space in between. So we look at net out over a whole calendar year. Water that would go to this green space will get where it used to flow to in between the 2 houses will now get intercepted by the roof on top of it. While the point of winds, it'll be winds coming in from the west, which would drive snow in here. Winds from the north, east, or south would actually block snow that would come into there. We also looked at the houses in between. There's a low spot in between the houses that currently drive the rainfall to the north and south through sheet flow. That will be maintained when they put this structure in as far as the grade in between there. So while we're looking at the one instance where there is a westerly wind and it's blowing in there, when you look at the net amount of area that's going to go to that green space, by putting that there, the roof actually capture water that would have gone there in the past that would be in the future.
Thank you. Are we ready to move the permit? Manager Blix?
I'm just wondering about because the 4 feet seems like, in terms of, I know it's not our purview, but it seems like it should be in violation of city fire codes, that you don't, I mean, that's what fire codes were designed for, was to prevent fire from jumping from one roof to another, from one to another, and they wanted to have a certain amount of separation. So I'm kind of baffled by the concept of allowing 2 buildings to be so close together.
Well, downtown, they're right next to one another, you know,
Yeah.
and they meet all the, I haven't examined it, but I'm sure they're not gonna get a building permit unless it's been approved by the fire department, the building inspector, et cetera.
That's why I'm saying I'm
And
baffled
they
by
get-
it.
They get the right, well, because it meets the code. And they've got the proper zoning, you know.
Somehow,
and-
yeah.
Well, it probably was existing zoning. Was it a zoning change?
They had to get a variance, I believe.
A variance? Well, you know, the city planning commission and city council approved that.
Yeah.
At this point, you know, we'd be searching for some far-reaching technical issue that is unproven, and to turn this down, you know, natural inclination would be to support the neighbors,
Yeah?
but you know, you got to have some basis from doing that, and I don't know that we do.
Manager Robbins?
It, it would seem to me that there's a fairly simple solution, and that is just sheet drainage off in 2 different directions on that strip, right?
Yep, and that's Manager Rock.
That's the way it sits right now, right?
And, so maybe a stipulation is that they would ensure that that sheet drainage maintains when the project's in.
Yeah. That's what I would recommend.
What does that look like?
Well,
It's grading.
it's just grading. and,
Grading.
You know, the land along that 4-foot strip would have a high point in the middle.
I'm going to go ahead and make a motion from the chair that we approve the permit because it meets all of the aspects of our regulation. I know that even with my house being set back a proper distance and my neighbor's house set back a proper distance, we have a snow tunnel between the houses. Precipitation is not something that we can make an exception for, I would say, and so I move that we approve the permit.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I guess I'll have to oppose.
No. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Thank you, sir, for coming forward. The next item before us is 12.1, Strategic Human Resource Planning. Mr. Whisker, this is a board discussion item.
President White, managers, tonight, item 12.1 is discussion to provide an overview of a draft scope of services to retain Springstead Incorporated to assist the watershed district in some strategic human resources planning. And tonight what we're looking for is discussion amongst the board members to provide some direction on whether or not the scope makes sense, and if it's deemed generally acceptable, we'll take any feedback between now and next week and refine the scope and bring this back with a proposal from Springstead for final action next week on November 17th. So before I walk through the scope, I want to provide a little bit of background on the history of how we got here and summarize the involvement of the Salary or Human Resources Task Force that was appointed back in June. So in June, staff approached the board as part of the standard policy to update salary against market comps to do a salary survey essentially every other year. That's part of the human resources policies that the board's adopted. And at that point in time, there was a discussion about taking a more comprehensive approach than just putting job descriptions back out on the market and looking for comps. And the board subsequently appointed a task force of Manager Olson and Manager Becker to work with the management team and the district administrator to discuss, what a more comprehensive approach might look like. So since June, we've met several times and arrived at the conclusion that there's an opportunity to link up human resources planning with the strategic planning that the organization is going through. Some of the organizational priority decisions that we're poised to be making in December and into the first quarter of 2017. So we worked with Springstead, who's done some of our past work, did the class and comp study in 2014. Is pretty familiar with our organizational structure, helped us draft job descriptions, and just familiar with the district in general and its mission focus and some of its needs. And we met with a consultant from Springstead and the task force to review the draft scope in sort of a working draft form about a week and a half ago. And so tonight we're going to frame that scope, and if it makes sense, we'll be back November 17th, like I said, with a formal proposal from Springstead, any final revisions, and a request for board action. So with that being said, I'll walk us through the document that's in our packet. It's probably the easiest way to do this without any sort of presentation. So on page 1, what we're outlining is the primary purpose, which is to develop a human resource plan that complements the organizational goals and priorities that will be established by the Board of Managers through the strategic planning process currently underway. And that strategic planning process, as you know, involves defining and aligning the purpose of programs, so our individual programs, around the revised vision, mission, goals that were established previously. And then what we'll be doing is, after program purpose is clearly defined, which we're reaching the end of tonight and moving into December, we'll be prioritizing initiatives within each individual program. to align with a redefined purpose or just a clear purpose that's been established and will be established by the board, and defining the level of inter-program coordination, the dependency between programs. After we've done that at a programmatic level, we'll be zooming back out as an organization and prioritizing the initiatives for the organization. So what might be the top 2 priorities for a program, we'll be stacking those against each other and saying what's most important for the organization over a 1-year, 2-year, sort of 5-year period of time, so that we have clear purpose, clear priority initiatives at a program level, at an organizational level. And then the next step is to implement that plan. You're going to have to prioritize and allocate resources both across programs and within programs. So where we are right now, that strategic planning process has been divided into 3 phases. And the issue identification phase was completed through a whole bunch of focus groups internally, surveys. Those issue identification documents have been provided to the board and summarized and discussed in committee, and serve as a roadmap for how we're looking at each individual program. So tonight we talked about education communications, and we used the issues that were flagged internally as sort of a roadmap to facilitate discussion. That's completed. We vetted the issues, and we're sort of in the process now of walking through analysis of those issues at a programmatic level, gearing up for decision making. So we're in sort of phase 2. And attached to the packet is the phase 2 process document that's been reviewed and discussed and circulated to the board of how we're going to walk through in the next 3 to 4 months, analyzing these issues that were flagged, and then gearing up to have the board make decisions. And again, after that, you have to operationalize those decisions. And what that means is we'll have to look at how we come up with a complementary set of financial strategies, financial plans, how we evaluate, prioritize, and align our technological resources. And the other part is how we do the same thing with human resources. So after we've made some basic decisions about priorities, we need to be thinking about how we fund those priorities, how we align technology behind those priorities over time, and similarly, how we structure human resources to accomplish those priorities. So what that really entails with human resources is looking at the needs, so what needs we have, what we currently have available, and then making recommendations to meet the needs. So that's what I'm going to walk you through now. On page 2, what we're driving at with the human resources plan is making sure that over time, to meet the organizational priorities, we have the right people and the right amount, with the right horsepower, the right skills, in the right place and the right time. So developing that kind of plan is going to require the district to do the following things. First, identify organizational priorities. What are the initiatives that are a priority over time, 1, 2, 5, 10 years? And then we'll be able to identify the staffing levels and skills that are going to be needed to fulfill those organizational priorities. After we know what the needs are, or concurrent with knowing what the needs are, we can scan the organization and look at the staffing capacities that we currently have, as well as the knowledge, skills, and abilities we currently have available. And then we'll be able to kind of put things together and see what we're missing, what capacities we're missing, what knowledge, skills, and abilities we're missing to deliver on the organizational priorities the board has set. And out of that, hopefully we can come up with a recommendation for how to accomplish the staff capacity and skills that we think we need and are missing to meet those needs. And we might be doing that through new recruitment, through restructuring, through training, or through outsourcing our needs. So that's sort of the basics. If you get into the project description and the way that the scope's set up, there's 3 phases of work that we've established for human resources planning, and the scope really focuses on phase 1, which is what I just outlined. That's mapping the skills, staffing capacity, and structure needed to support our priorities. After we do that, phase 2 is developing the whole human resource philosophy to support phase 1. That's things like what's the district's position on retention, on pay for performance, on your benefits packages, like how all of those things add up to make sure that you can actually sustain the skills, staffing capacity, and structure needed to support your priorities. And that will come quite later. And finally, once you've got that plan delivered, you're in operational mode. The administrator and the management team are making sure that on an annual, 2-year, 3-year basis that we're following that plan and checking in with the board to make sure that we still have everything that we need and we're getting things accomplished. So if you turn to page 3, phase 1, which is what we're talking about, is really broken into 3 discrete tasks. And the tasks, I'm not going to go through the specific workflow for each task that's in your packet, but I'll summarize again the basic tasks, and then we'll talk about how that workflow will be routed and worked through committee and through the board. So task 1 is to develop a needs assessment, which is, again, going to be looking at what you've set as organizational priorities, how much staff time you need to accomplish those priorities, so the sort of staff volume, staff capacity, and what the knowledge, skills, and abilities would be needed to fulfill those priorities. So that's a needs assessment. And what we're looking at is, since we're looking at the board making some priority decisions in December and January for the organization, coming out of the Planning and Policy Committee, will be facilitating a series of discussions with the board, what the organizational priorities are, that we should be able to develop a human resource needs assessment in February and start having discussions about what we think we need. Task 2 we can do concurrent because it's looking at what we already have. So we'll perform an organizational scan to look at what capacities do we currently have. So where's staff allocated, what amounts of time do we have available, where is that prioritized, and what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that we have available across departments and within the organization. Because people presumably have capacities and skills that are being allocated in one area, and they may have hidden talents and skills that really benefit some of the needs that we identify, and so we want to be able to match those up. And then task 3 is going to be essentially looking at the gaps, what you need versus what you have, and saying for the future we're going to need these capacities in these areas and these knowledge and skills and abilities in these areas. And from that, we're going to have to develop a set of recommendations for the organizational structure, for priorities for retention, for areas where we may recruit the capacities and skills that we need, or areas where we would benefit from training the skills that we need and making a long-term investment in the personnel that we have, and areas where we could achieve our capacity issues or knowledge, skills, abilities issues by outsourcing. And it's an aggressive schedule, but if we have the needs assessment finished in February, and that's been discussed by the executive committee and then through the board, and we can perform the organizational scan moving into January, we should be able to start having discussions about recommendations on all those things between February and March. So we're sort of targeting first quarter of next year for actually having decisions be made. Below those 3 tasks, I've just outlined expectations so that we've got clarity with the consultant, the board, on the questions or the information we expect to gather. So regardless of the workflow and the process that's set up, we should expect that we're going to identify the capacities and skills that we need on both a short, mid, long-term basis to fulfill what's identified as mission-critical priorities. We'll be able to look at the capacity skills we currently have. Then we'll match those up and see what we're presently lacking to fulfill our priorities. And then again, be able to identify which ones we can fulfill through training, restructuring strategies, where we want to recruit, where we want to retain, what we might outsource. So the idea here is that we would have the executive committee under the governance structure deals with human resources for the board at a committee level, so that to begin the process, we'd have an executive committee meeting to make sure that we have clear expectations and that we can discuss the finer points of logistics if we need to. And there's an executive committee scheduled, I believe, for Monday where we could take this up. If that doesn't work, we could do it at a subsequent executive committee meeting. From there, both the needs assessment and the scan of what we currently have We could route either through the executive committee meeting to be consistent, or we could route it through the planning committee to sync up with the strategic plan. But in any event, all of that's going to ultimately come to the board. Task 3 will definitely be routed through the executive committee, since it's more traditional HR discussions on, again, restructuring, retention, recruitment, sort of the decision-making analysis before that comes to the board in March. So there's some consideration there in terms of how the board wants to manage workflow through the committee structures that it has. And we did speak with legal counsel, so I wanted to mention something about the task force. And Chuck can jump in and help me out if I miss something. But speaking with Lewis, he'd recommended that if we're going to retain the task force, that you be very explicit in its discrete purpose and the time frame over which it's going to continue to operate, and suggested that maybe it has...
Based on what legal concept there? It's just a subcommittee that doesn't constitute a quorum of the board to assist in developing the proposal that the board would consider.
Manager Miller, board members, the framework is the open meeting law.
How does 2 members violate the open meeting law?
Well, the open meeting law applies to a quorum of the board. It also applies to a quorum of any committee of the board.
They don't constitute a committee of the board, do they?
It's a task force.
So yes, well, this is a gray area. We've provided counsel to the extent that you would like the flexibility of not having to provide notice in public meetings. We've provided counsel about the way to frame the role of the task force so that it doesn't constitute a committee. The open meeting law doesn't define a committee, and it's a gray area. But the general principles are, the purpose of the open meeting law is that deliberations of the policy body should be held in public. And so the concern about having subquorums of the board meeting is if they're serving to basically deprive the full body of the deliberative process. So even if decisions aren't being made, but things come forward from a group to the full body where they're basically rubber stamped.
Well, they're not going to be basically rubber stamped.
Well, no, I'm just explaining those are cases where the board and the Department of Administration have said, no, that's a violation. So we're simply advising that the key is that the task force members work with staff, serve to help staff understand the board's perspective, but that it be set up in a way so that all the board members basically have the same access to the materials that the task force is working with, and that when matters come before the full body or before one of your established committees, that basically there be a full discussion and that the record reflect that.
Right, and the established committees don't constitute a quorum of the board either. So,
but the committee, well, the committees meet in public meeting, and if that's where deliberation occurs, then that's perfectly appropriate. That's what's supposed to happen.
okay, I think we're being overly lawyered on,
Let me,
it's appropriate.
since I appointed the task force, revisit the motion that was made to do that and give some thought this we can perhaps discuss at the executive committee also.
I didn't hear what you said.
I don't understand.
Well, I want to go back and revisit what we said the task force was going to do in the first place, because I don't recall the exact language.
Okay.
And then bring it back.
I would ask, I was not, James's conversation was with Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's anything different or, otherwise that you wanted to indicate.
We view our legal counsel interchangeably, so.
Madam President?
We're
Yes.
not, I'm sorry.
One moment. Manager Miller?
I have no intention of violating the open meeting law, but I have no intention of restricting the board from participating in an important function that we've delegated to two capable people to participate in. And I don't want that, I don't want restrictions placed on that, and it still be legal.
You have a comment, Mr. Whisker?
Just that we will be bringing this back next week. I think if we need to look into it, and I just wanted to offer that we can make a final decision next week. I think the board needs to consider it, and staff needs to have clarity on what the purpose of the task force is, so we sort of know metes and bounds. I think with this kind of work, it's going to be very critical that we have clear expectations between the board on what the role of staff is, what the role of the task force is, how information is routed through executive committee, and to legal counsel's point that we have well thought out process up front that everybody agrees to and understands on how the information is ultimately going to be routed to the board by the district administrator for decision. So it's obviously the board's pleasure whether they want to keep a task force or not, but I think clarity on purpose is important.
Just a
Mr. Earl.
just a brief comment on that purpose. I think my operating assumption, and I need to go back and look at the original motion as well, was that the task force was set up to help us define the scope and the process and the things that needed to be studied, which would then be brought to the board for its consideration. So I think that was the kind of just framing the question that would be discussed and answered by the board. And in some ways, maybe the task force has completed that task or near to completion, so that there might be some other options there too.
Yeah,
Thank you, Manager Olson.
okay. We've met several times and we've had open discussions about what we wanted to cover, followed by the staff putting together those thoughts and then having, follow-up meetings to review what they had assembled. And so that we would have a document that we have tonight in its draft form to present to the board. So it's more of an assembly process up to this point. No decisions being made or anything like that. It's just that it was a structure that we could all get together and chat about with staff. And Manager Becker and I have been on at both of those meetings, along with staff and Springstead. So,
Manager Blix?
I just have a question, and maybe Manager Olson, you could answer this, because I'm confused by the overall structure here, because I guess I am confused why Mr. Whisker is presenting this to us and not Mr. Mant or our administrator, because I don't get that, because it feels like this is the function of the administrator and Mr. Mant, not Mr. Whisker. So I'm totally confused by that. Plus, I'm confused, Mr. Olson, how did this end up in the planning committee versus in the operations committee? Because it also feels like it's something that should be done by the operations committee. So I'm just boggled by the whole thing in terms of the overall structure. So if you could address that, it'd be helpful to me
I
to
don't know that it's been a part of the planning committee.
No,
It
no,
has
no,
not.
At all.
Well, it's coming back to it's coming back through what's being proposed is all to go through the planning committee structure.
Manager Erdahl, I'm sorry, Mr. Erdahl.
So
I don't get
just-
to be a manager.
Yeah.
Titles, you can throw titles around these days.
You have the answer to my question, I'm just.
Your Honor.
I can try to respond. I'm not sure if I can answer, but Manager Blix and managers. This has been kind of a team effort, so we've had internal staff team that's put things together, and I think one of the reasons that James is at the table instead of Dave, who's been active part of this as well as myself, is that it kind of morphed into a parallel process with our strategic planning effort. And what we wanted to make sure is that when we're talking about how we allocate resources and priorities in the strategic framework that we're going through, that James and his staff have been directed by the board to do, this is one of the most critical resources we have to prioritize and allocate. So we're doing this kind of as a team process and working with outside consultants as well to make sure that we're following kind of best management practices for HR policies and bringing in perspectives from folks and it wasn't in the planning committee, it was actually that's why the task force was created by the Board of Managers so that we could benefit from private sector experience from Manager Olson, and also quite a long history in government work with Mr. Becker, Manager Becker, who both have kind of brought different perspectives to that process.
And by the way, the presenter tonight could have been any one of the three. They've been at all the meetings. So. How they picked James, that's fine by me. But
James spins a good tale.
Created background data.
I choose to view it as drawing the short straw.
I guess overall, my concern is that it does feel like he is burdened with a lot of things. And so I'm just kind of wondering why there isn't more sharing of some of the responsibilities instead of having everything fall to him. And why the two of you aren't stepping up to the plate, I guess is my question. And I mean, I'll just to be upfront about, my concern, and because he has a lot of things to do. And
Fortunately, we aren't in charge of assigning staff, so that's a lucky thing for us. Let's set that aside as not germane to this issue and move on with the report.
Well, I was done with the report, so.
Okay.
I think the functional questions are, does the workflow make sense, the actual tasks that are outlined in terms of a needs assessment, what you currently have in gaps analysis, and then make recommendations from that. That's sort of the core question. Does the scope make sense? And then there's the question of how you want to route the work. And what's in here is draft. It's watermark draft. It's here for discussion, not for action. The reason, to answer Manager Blick's question about routing through the Planning and Policy Committee is for both task 1 and 2, they're essentially findings of what we need and what we have, and so that we would route that through the Planning and Policy Committee, which is engaged in all the discussions to date on program purpose and program priorities, so that would be good context and appropriate there, and then coming up, just like what's coming out of the Planning and Policy Committee, to the full board. The final piece is recommended or drafted to be routed through the Executive Committee because it's a discussion of proposed solutions. But the board needs to figure out what's, how do you want to do this work, assuming the scope makes sense. So for tonight, I think my two questions are, does the scope make sense? Is the workflow appropriate? We have routed through Springstead. The task force has looked at it. We've had those discussions, minimal feedback from through that process in terms of red flags. So tonight, that's your main consideration. Does the proposed flow of work make sense? And then secondary, how do you want to route that through your governance structure? Recognizing the board is going to make final decisions, but you have a committee structure and the ability to appoint ad hoc task forces.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
Well, I think it's a terrific plan. Sorry I didn't spend enough time studying it to defend every element of it, but it looks comprehensive. We've got the staff analysis and engagement through the various, what do we call those? You've got the
For strategic planning?
Yeah.
How we're using staff?
Yeah.
Well, we have cross-departmental work groups that are looking at every
Right.
program and every issue.
And they're totally engaged. I've mentioned several times, I've never seen a more engaged staff in every element of a planning effort. And is well managed and has seen this. And we've got a great outside consultants. We've got 2 board members that have got unique experiences in HR, and I think it's a great great outline. I think it should report to the executive committee, because rather than planning, but timing would be important to know what the strategic plan is going to look like to match the HR plan. So
Manager Olson?
I do have one small question for James. Did the hours listed in there change at all since the last meeting? Did they get refined?
Right, well, those were, Manager Olson, managers, those were sort of staff's best guess, breaking things down into sort of sub-tasks or micro-tasks. And Springstead's looking at that, and based on their experience doing this kind of work, they're changing the hours. So the hours will change between now and next week. This was sort of draft form to give.
Okay, so this is reflecting what we discussed at the last meeting?
Correct. It has
done-
not been yet revised based
Thank
on
you.
feedback that we're waiting for from them.
Thank you.
Manager Shackleton?
Just thinking about the task force versus committee versus board relationship, and looking at the product that has come before us today, I get the sense that two managers were engaged providing context for staff as opposed to providing direction to staff. And I'm not an attorney, but when we meet in committees, I think we give direction, and we are given insights, and we help steer the ship. And I hear the concerns that Smith Partners raised, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of deviating from where we're at, but I've been trying to think it through, and I don't know that I have real concerns with this task force. It's kind of it seems like its purpose is waning right now, and if the work product is going to come before the executive committee, that seems like it's kind of a moot point in many ways. Unless I'm misunderstanding something.
Mr. Holman?
Chair White, board members, I want to say clearly we haven't expressed concerns with this arrangement. What we have simply done in the context of conversation with James about the overall program is that we have wanted to simply make clear what the kind of the boundaries are and the best way to structure the process so that there isn't an issue, or so that there isn't, if some concern should arise by some other person in the process, that everything is very clear. We are not at all involved in this process. We shouldn't be, and there's not a role for us. Our suggestion was in the sense that it's best up front for us to have a basic input as to the structure, give any guidance we can give to ensure that you're protected for things that you can't yet anticipate that could arise, and then we step out. So our participation didn't arise because we looked at what the plan is and that we felt that there was an actual concern that we had to intervene about.
Thank you.
And I guess my follow-up to that was this task force was created at a board meeting, and if the issue, I understand the concern, but as we're looking at the draft report, it seems a little late to raise the concern when the task force was created in a public forum. And I'm not directing that at you. I'm just kind of directing that at, if this was an issue, I don't know why now.
Well, because the continuing work is the question, not what has happened so far, but what is going to be happening, and what is the proper venue or routing for that future action. And that's why it's different than it was.
We could just take on our role as managers and work directly with the consultant, with the whole board. And we've done that before, and it's been a disaster. We never accomplished anything. But we took up a lot of time.
Yes, I kind of agree that maybe it should just be turned back over to the executive committee if that's their if their role is to handle HR stuff, as long as the executive committee gets noticed, just like the other committees, and the agendas are kind of posted like the other committees, so that in the event that anyone wanted to come to participate, they could.
It's in your agenda.
Yeah.
It was noticed. Thank you.
So,
So this is a discussion item, not a decision, but the sentiment of the board is that the scope looks fine and that the routing will involve the executive committee, possibly the task force, but we'll look into, we'll discuss it at executive committee on Monday, the posted meeting, and re-examine, for my part at least, the original charge to the task force. Administrator Earl.
And the other point is that we're hoping to bring this back to the board a week from tonight for approval of a
Yep.
proposal. So, because as James mentioned, there's fairly aggressive timelines, so we want to
Sure.
get moving.
So, everything will be routed through the executive committee and then up to the board. The role of the task force will be determined if there is one or not one next week, and we'll bring back
That sounds fair.
the scope and the proposal on the
Let's
17th.
plan on that.
Makes sense.
Thank you, everyone. I guess we can let you go.
Unless you want to do that.
Is there more?
Well, no,
I had one update, but
there's some update, since he's in the hot seat already, we can, for the administrative report, there's a couple, I think that's the next agenda.
It is.
Do you want to start with
I
your
just
two
have-
updates
I
on
just have one thing, so
Okay.
if you want
Yeah,
me to lead
yeah,
off.
go ahead.
I think it was last week now, district staff was invited to present to the RAPS group, and I always forget what the acronym is, but it's comprised of the Metropolitan Council,
Water
the
resource.
the Metropolitan Council, Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, the DNR, the Pollution Control Agency, and Board of Water and Soil Resources, and we shared the presentation time with Doug Snyder from MWMO, and the presentation was geared at innovative urban water planning, and they're particularly interested in the Watershed District's model of integrating land use and water, and some of our success stories and our dissection of the watershed model. I think that group spends an awful lot of time discussing more outstate issues and agricultural issues, so they're very interested to kind of get a briefing on what's going on in more of the metropolitan area. And it was a good presentation. It seemed to be very well received, and afterwards we had some discussion about the model being brought back for subsequent discussion and how we might get these ideas sort of percolated up to a higher state level. The Metropolitan Council representative that had organized the meeting for us had suggested that we present to a broader cross-section of Metropolitan Council, have an ongoing discussion, and maybe involve some of the governor's water policy staff. So I thought that was encouraging.
Thank you.
And the kind of coordinator for this is Karen Jensen, who has also presented to you before and worked closely with our research and monitoring staff on a number of different projects. So I think that that's another demonstration of how kind of these partnership efforts at one level of the organization kind of can impact and influence and grow kind of a collaboration and partnerships in other areas too. So
Thank you.
Thanks.
another former kayaker.
Former kayaker.
she's
Like
a
me.
former.
I'm a former kayaker.
Not reformed kayaker, it's not the same thing as
Retired.
Retired.
Back to you, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, President White. Just another kind of update that the MAUD annual meeting is the end of, actually starts in less than a month now, in just a few weeks. December 1 through 3. And we'll have a process next Thursday, correct?
Yes.
To determine the delegate appointments for the watershed district. So that will be part of next week's business also. We also had, I circulated to President White, and I'm not sure if this has kind of been done as the organization in the past, but in the state of Minnesota, there's a lot of open appointments right now, and some of them are specifically seats for watershed district representatives. And I don't think that's something, maybe, I think that's some things that people do as individuals, not as an organization. But I wanted to highlight and bring those to your attention. I think Manager Blixt, you've served on the Clean Water Action Council. I saw that was one of the seats noted in the open appointments vacancies, as well as a role for Bowser has some seats of representative from watershed districts available. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and sometimes that might be an opportunity for either one of you or maybe somebody that we could kind of bring up from the community or the CAC or from somewhere else that could represent the watershed. I'm not sure what the restrictions are, but just kind of as a point of information. And then just a couple kind of last notes of kind of somewhat commentary, but there was an election on Tuesday. And so some of our partnerships with some key cities within the watershed district have had some turnover in some of our key partners. So we are very grateful and thankful to some of their service and partnership collaboration with us in the past. And they've, especially a couple mayors that we've worked closely with and that have been a big part of the programs and the things that we've able to accomplish. And of course, we look forward to kind of developing new connections with the people that are coming in as well. So it's part of those transition times that right in the middle of our comprehensive plan process, we're doing a lot of interactions with the cities and planning how to reach out to them on a sub-watershed basis and connect with all these constituencies. So we're also be meeting some new faces and new roles in that process too. And then just lastly, tomorrow is a holiday for the Watershed District, Veterans Day, so a good day to remember and honor our veterans. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.